GRFP team here joining us today. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to them.
Well, thank you very, very much. It's a delight to be here today. And my name is Christopher Hill, Dr. Chill, and I'm joined today by Dr. Norman and Dr. Shieldbach, and we're all members of the Graduate Research Fellowship Program, or GRFP. Today, we're going to first start off with a little bit of a presentation and then have an opportunity for some questions and answers. You'll notice as we go through this that there's a lot of information about GRFP, and some of it you might say, well, I'd like to know a little bit more about that than we're able to provide in the presentation, or maybe even later with the questions and answers. And so a good resource for finding excellent information about the Graduate Research Program, or GRFP, is probably the best place to start is the site at www.nsfgrfp.org. That's a great place to start. And GRFP is part of the Division of Graduate Education at the National Science Foundation. So we're delighted to be here from the National Science Foundation, or NSF, here today to talk a little bit more about GRFP, the Graduate Research Fellowship Program. Here's the plan for today in terms of the presentation. I'm going to start off with a little bit of general information and a description of the program of GRFP, and Dr. Norman will provide that information about the program, the overall broad view of the program, and a little bit about eligibility and ineligibility. And then Dr. Shieldbach will tell us a little bit more about GRFP in terms of the application package, all the parts that are connected with the applying, and then what the reviewers look at, the review criteria. And that will bring us to the end of the presentation and an opportunity for you to ask us some questions. So with that plan, let's go to the next slide. And I'm going to hand it off to my esteemed colleague, Dr. Norman, who's an expert in all about NSF GRFP.
Welcome, everyone. We're happy to have you join us today. So a little bit about NSF GRFP. GRFP is actually NSF's oldest program. It's been around since 1952. There's been over 60,000 GRFP fellowships awarded, with 40 plus fellows who have gone on to become Nobel laureates. We have fellows from and in every state, and over 450 fellows have become members of the National Academy of Sciences. We recommend that you, of course, submit your fellowship application if you're interested early, because GRFP is open to individuals pursuing research-based master's and doctoral programs, eligible fields of study. And those eligible fields of study are those supported by NSF. If you look at the bottom right-hand corner of the slide, you'll see that those are general fields that are listed, so such as your chemistry, mathematical sciences, but also within all those major fields are very many subfields. And if you have questions about what fields and subfields, the best thing to do is to look at the GRFP solicitation, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. So if you're thinking about GRFP, and of course, as I said before, submitting early, a good resource is that nsfgrfp.org in the bottom left-hand corner of your slide. At r.org, you'll see a decision tree. There's also a format compliance check, which will help with application submission. Some good things about GRFP. GRFP is actually a 5-year fellowship period, with 3 of those years being financially supported. There's no postgraduate service requirement for that fellowship funds. And it includes a $34,000 annual stipend for those 3 years and a $12,000 cost of education allowance. We're happy to say that amongst our GRFP institutions represented, there are over 500, and that's per competition. For competition, we have over 12,000 applications submitted, and we give out over 2,000 offers through the process. Next slide, please. I'm going to go a little deeper into the description. So as I mentioned before, GRFP has 5 years of fellowship awards. That adds up to $138,000 worth of financial support. I talked about the $34,000 yearly stipend. That's paid through the institution, a graduate institution, but paid through the institution directly to the fellow. There's also that $12,000 education allowance that I mentioned, and that's paid directly to the graduate institution for tuition and fees. There are other opportunities that are associated with GRFP. One opportunity is a very well-paid intern opportunity, which is a non-academic intern program. The acronym is actually intern. There's the individual with disability support, and there's the career life balance initiative, which are also benefits open to GRFP fellows. So as I mentioned, the fellowship is awarded to the individual, but it's paid through the academic or graduate institution. Some good news is that it's flexible. So the fellows have their choice of project, advisor, and graduate program. It's unrestricted in that there's no service requirement after completion. And it's also portable. So you can use it at any academic institution that's accredited, nonprofit, and it's a US institution of higher education. And that US institution of higher education must have a campus in the US with a US based master's and doctoral programs, because those are the ones we support. If you're thinking success rate, we, as I mentioned before, provide approximately or over actually 2,000 fellowship offers yearly. We get approximately 2,000 fellows to accept. So our most recent success rate, if you look at our 2021 at the very bottom of this list here, you'll see that we had a 17% success rate, which is actually a slight jump after 3 years of staying at 16%. Next slide, please. The overall goal of GRFP is to recruit individuals into STEM. We want to select, recognize, and financially support these individuals who have demonstrated the potential to be high achieving scientists and engineers. So we're looking at those early in their career. We also want to make sure we broaden participation in STEM of underrepresented groups, which include women, minorities, persons with disabilities, and veterans. I'm going to talk a little bit about eligibility. So as you see listed above, you see where it says NSF 21-602. That might be the latest published solicitation. Whenever applying to GRFP in any other program at NSF, you should definitely make sure that you're looking at the most updated solicitation. So on our solicitation, you'll see that the GRFP, to be eligible for GRFP, you have to be a US citizen, national, or permanent resident. As I mentioned before, early in career, so we're looking at undergrads who are who have no graduate study, and we're looking at those very new graduate students. We're looking for those pursuing research-based master's and doctoral degrees. Unfortunately, we do not fund professional degrees. We're also looking for those in STEM and STEM education. Individuals must commit to being enrolled full-time in a graduate program at that, again, accredited nonprofit US institution. Unfortunately, we do not support study at foreign institutions. There are 4 levels pretty much for GRFP. The level 1 is for that senior or the recent bachelor's degree holder with no graduate study. Level 2 and level 3. Level 2 are first-year graduate students. Level 3 are those second-year graduate students. And when you say level 3, that's no more than 1 year completed in your first graduate degree program. Level 4 are returning graduate students. So these are those applicants who may have had greater than 2-year interruption in graduate study. No, they would not have a doctorate. They also would not be enrolled in a graduate program at the application deadline. And those deadlines, of course, will be listed in solicitation. Another thing that's key about these levels is that level 2 and level 3 applicants can only apply once. So once you're in graduate school, you're only allowed to apply once. Level 1 and level 4 can apply more than once. Next slide, please. Some eligible degree programs, as I mentioned, we support those programs or those fields of study supported by NSF. Those we do not support, the GRFP does not support our professional degree programs such as MBA programs or DDS programs. That also includes the joint science professional degree programs such as your JD PhD or MD PhD. We also do not support your community global public health or MPH programs, MSW, those counseling, social work programs. We do not support education programs, except we are very excited to receive STEM education. Those in STEM education degree programs. The same thing goes with history. We do not support history degree programs, but history of science programs we do consider. And for more details, of course, you can go to that website that I mentioned before. We'll mention again for more information. And of course, read the solicitation for details. So if we digged a little deeper and looked at the ineligible fields of study, we would look at the research with directly health-related goals, and these are all ineligible. Diagnosis or treatment of disease, animal models of disease, public global health programs, all ineligible. Behavioral studies, ineligible. Those outcomes research programs are also ineligible. So health services, health policy, those research that directly leads to clinical trials. Applied research on plant pathology is ineligible field of study, and also impacts on food safety. Next slide, please. I will pass things over to my colleague, Dr. Schilbach, to talk a little bit more about the application package.
Thank you, Dr. Norman. So next slide, thank you. The GRFP application requires several things, as you might imagine. And so we'll tick through these, and then we'll go through them in a bit more detail and throw some other relevant bits of information in there. So the first thing up is when you enter the application portal, you might want to fill out this personal information form. It records your personal information, and you put in your details about your education, your research experience, awards, publications, things, just general sorts of information. Now, beyond that, we'll get into the meat of the application. And so we've got a 3-page statement, or rather you're allowed 3 pages to give your personal relevant background and your future goals. Well, and again, we'll describe that here in a bit. And then in a separate 2-page statement, you will describe a research problem and how you would tackle it. Then for each degree granting program that you've been enrolled in, you'll want to submit a transcript. And then you'll also provide letters of reference, or rather, when you're applying, you'll be giving the name and the email address of up to 5 people who can provide you letters of reference. Now, of course, you want to keep in mind the deadlines. And we don't have a single GRFP deadline, but rather we've got a week in October when they're all due. And they are due by the declared field that the application is in. So, for example, for last year, the first day, on that first day of the week, life sciences applications were due. And the second day we saw computer science and materials research, et cetera, and then, you know, as you move down to the end of the week, we've got chemistry, geosciences, physics, and astronomy. Now, the information on the exact deadlines is going to be in that solicitation and also on the NSF GRFP.org website. So make sure and check that out and make sure that you're targeting the right deadline, because you surely do not want to mess that up, write a complete application, and then, you know, realize it should have been submitted yesterday. Okay, next slide. Now, to give you an idea of the general timeline, I think the one thing missing here is, when do you start working? And if you intend to apply in this fall, you might want to start thinking about it right now. But as I mentioned, in mid to late October is when the applications are due. And then shortly thereafter is when those you've asked to write reference letters, when their reference letters are due. And if you are a level 1 applicant, that is, you are not in a graduate program at the moment, then part of this whole process is going to be to apply to graduate schools. Then when it comes around to early mid-spring, that's when the fellowship offers are actually extended. That's when the announcement is made. There's usually a few weeks that you're given the chance to mull it over and declare your acceptance, and then whether you're going to be, you'll need to be in a graduate program if you're accepting the award, but whether you're going to go immediately collect the stipend and the support, or if you're going to go on what we call reserve and reserve the stipend and the support for later on in your graduate career. And then then in early September, that's when the fellowship actually begins. Next slide, please. Okay, let's dig into the actual statements here. And the first of these is that we'll discuss is the personal relevant background and goals statement. This is an opportunity for you to tell your story and also to demonstrate your potential for STEM research. And so consider it 3 pages in which you can talk about who you are, what your motivation is, the sorts of experiences that you've had, and how all of that together makes you an excellent candidate for this fellowship. In other words, why would the National Science Foundation support you? Why are you deserving of this support? And you'll want to make sure to give some details. So what are the experiences that shaped your goals? The experiences that you've had, what was the project? What was the role that you had in it? You know, how did you become involved? Of course, reviewers love to hear stories about how you took initiative, how you pursued an opportunity, a project. And so those sorts of things should be folded in. And then every time you describe a project, you want to make sure that you describe your contribution to the project. And I want to be careful in how I phrase this, but don't be shy about it. Don't blow your contributions out of proportion, but make sure that you are giving an accurate description of really what you contributed to the particular project. Okay, next slide. Now, the second statement we're going to talk about is the research statement. Now, I want to be very clear about this. This is not a description of what it is that you will do. It is not a description of a project that you are automatically locked into. And, you know, if you are an undergraduate right now, you're probably saying, well, how do I know what I'm going to start off with in graduate school? That's not what this is about. What this is about is it's an opportunity for you to show how you would attack a problem. So define a problem. It might be something that you're working on at your home institution in a lab there. It might be something that you are pursuing during the summer. And outline a problem, something that needs to be studied. Explain how you would attack the problem. What would you expect to learn? What are the metrics of success? And then, how would you follow it up? This is scientific writing, it's scientific communication, and the same tenets apply. So you want to avoid jargon, and you want to make sure that you're communicating clearly for non-specialists. Now, the reviewers are all going to be people with expertise in the particular field, but what you'll find out pretty quickly is that when you're investigating just about anything, you end up being an expert on a very small part of the field overall. And you might want to sort of generalize that. Well, of course, if I know this, then everybody knows it. Well, that's sort of a classic mistake. You want to make sure that when somebody reads through it, they're not hung up on acronyms, they're not hung up on jargon, they understand what you're saying. And just as an aside, if you can explain something complex in a way that people understand, they feel smart. And when they feel smart, they love you for it. So you want to make sure that you've got some really clear pros in this. Make your contributions clear in it as well. How much of this have you hammered out on your own? And in this section and in the personal statement section, make sure that you clearly address NSF's merit review criteria. And there are two of them. We'll talk about them here in a bit, but they are intellectual merit and broader impacts. And you'll want to break things out so that those are handled under separate headings. Okay. Next slide. Okay, the reference letters. Now, there's a feature of the reference letters that I think is phenomenal. You're required to provide 3 names in order for the application to go in. So if you don't have 3 names and email addresses listed, the application won't be accepted. But you can list up to 5. And the reason why there's a flexibility here is you have to realize that in order for the application to be reviewed, your application must have at least 2 letters of support. If you have them, if they come in, 3 letters of support will be pulled into the application and be part of the application that's reviewed. The feature that I love about this is that when you put in the list, the references, you can put them in order. You should put them in the order so that those who you think are going to give the best, most informative letter are listed first, and then everyone listed accordingly afterward. And the reason for this is that we want to make sure that you get the best, most informative, most helpful letters in the application. Now, sometimes though, life intervenes and people can't, submit a letter, something happens, and we don't want applicants to pay a price for that. So then what would happen is that if that top letter didn't come in, then everybody bumps up on that list. And so instead of maybe the top 3 letters coming in, if number 1 doesn't come in, then letters 2 through 4 will be included. Okay. So that way, like I said, you get the best letters included in the application. Now, regarding the transcripts, so everybody has to submit a transcript from where they earned their bachelor's degree or will earn their bachelor's degree, but you also need to make sure that you have a transcript from every institution that from where you've been enrolled in a degree granting program. So if you switched schools, you'll need a transcript from both of them, et cetera. One nice feature is that official transcripts will be accepted, but unofficial transcripts will also be accepted. Okay, next slide. Now, the review criteria, I had mentioned these before. Next slide. So, we mentioned, so we're sort of laying this out in chronological order, but of course, when you're conceiving of your application, when you're starting to pull it together, you really should be thinking about these review criteria from the very start. And the National Science Board, which oversees the National Science Foundation, has approved these merit criteria, and for all applications, all proposals coming into NSF, they are reviewed using these criteria. The first one being intellectual merit. And just broadly speaking, how important is the proposed activity to advancing knowledge within the particular field? And then broader impacts. So how well does the proposed activity benefit society or desired societal outcomes? Next slide, please. So this is we have these two review criteria, but it's a comprehensive review. And how they're applied here is that the applicants to the Graduate Research Fellowship Program, they're reviewed based upon their demonstrated potential for doing something significant in their designated STEM field. It's going to be using a comprehensive and holistic approach. So it's not one particular aspect of every applicant that is supposed to be considered by the reviewers. They consider the entire package. And they're going to be giving consideration to all components of it. So it's not, it's not everybody's base graded according to their grade in organic chemistry. It's everything. It's the history, the educational and the research record. What have you done in terms of leadership and outreach and service activities, individual experiences, and aspirations. All of that is taken into consideration. Next slide. So, a little bit of detail on the intellectual merit. So as I mentioned, potential to advance knowledge. You want to make sure in both of your statements, and also it's something that should be addressed in the letters of recommendation. What is your potential to advance knowledge? And that can be reflected in a lot of different ways. So is there a demonstrated ability to do well in academic endeavors? So grades, awards, presentations, things like that. Is there evidence that you can plan and conduct research? Can you work both as a team and independently? Because of course, science requires a good deal of flexibility on how you tackle problems. Can you interpret and communicate research? Have you taken initiative? And can you sort of, again, demonstrate that you've got this potential to advance knowledge? Like I mentioned, you want to actually be explicit about this in the personal statement, in the research plan. And of course, there's going to be evidence for it in that initial collection of information about you, but it also should turn up in those letters of recommendation. Next slide. Now, regarding the broader impacts, this is also considered. It's equally important. And it's, again, it's one of these things that you should tailor to yourself. So what are these societal benefits? Well, they may include increasing participation of underrepresented groups, women, persons with disabilities, veterans in STEM. So that right there, broadening participation is considered a societal benefit. Evidence of outreach or mentoring, anything that you've done that shows your willingness to help your community and the broader scientific community is definitely welcome. Public outreach in terms of improving scientific literacy or public engagement with STEM. Any sort of collaboration between academia, industry, et cetera, all of that, and any bit there, any argument you can make with any of these various elements could turn up in that personal statement, but also the research plan, and in your letters as well, letters of recommendation. So next slide. And I'm going to kick it back to my colleague, Dr. Hill.
Thank you, Dr. Shieldbach, and thank you, Dr. Norman. I always learn something new when both of you give these talks, and I really, really appreciate how careful you are in giving the presentation about NSF's Graduate Research Fellowship Program. We're delighted to be able to try to answer your questions now. Sometimes the questions are very detailed, and it's better to actually contact the Operations Center at www.nsfgrfp.org. But we'll do our best to at least give you the broad principles connected with the kinds of questions you might have. So let's see if you have any questions for the GRFP team today.